So welcome to Albums of a Year, and this time we're going to not listen to an album, but talk about albums. So as continuing with our previous series of going through different albums of a year, we are going to talk about the year 2015. We've recently covered a couple albums as reactions from 2015, so some of those could be featured, some of those might not be featured. So first off, as we usually do, what do you think was kind of going on in 2015? What was like the musical landscape of that year?
So the later, or I guess the closer to modern day we come, the more expanded music is generally. And so trying to pin down trends or like a general style is really hard, especially in the 2010s. This has become almost impossible because with, I guess, the not really birth, but the increase of magnitude of like indie artists, anyone being able to get their hands on studio equipment and record and post it on the internet, it's become almost impossible to figure out trends. That said, I think that there are trends that I've noticed that might be biased to my tastes in music. Out of those, I'd probably say psychedelic rock or just neo psychedelia in general, because psychedelic pop also goes into there. That's a huge one, and it would grow in 2016 and 17 and 18. It kind of continued to be really big. Certain indie-tronica slash psychedelic pop sounds almost started, or like there were like really important albums for that kind of niche of psychedelic rock that kind of started to grow out of this year. I feel like this year was kind of a starting point for that, and out of that tons of bands in the later years came. So I would say that that's an important part that I noticed. What about you?
That's very true, all that, and I would say I'd add on to that like dream pop and indie folk were kind of big in this year, and of course like hip hop was probably one of its biggest in 2015. So all that will definitely be mentioned. I think that like rock as kind of like in its regular form was kind of non-existent in this year, but you had many subgenres of kind of experimental or indie rock that were evolving and changing in the 2010s. That some good albums in those genres. So it's going to be kind of hard to pin this down as easy as like we could 1979, right? So we'll start with your number 5.
So my number 5, we actually did cover it on this channel. Is The Powers That Be by Death Grips.
Oh, nice.
I feel like in that video we've covered most of what could be said about it, but it's an experimental industrial hip hop album, at least for the first half.
For the first half.
The second half is experimental rock / hip hop. It's punk.
Yeah.
Different a little bit.
Something else.
But yeah, really, I don't know. I feel like it really broke boundaries, being, I guess, avant-garde or experimental. That's often what those genres do. So like really broke boundaries, pushed the limits of what like is music in many ways. And like the use of samples is just like so spectacular and impressive, and often catchy in the weirdest of ways that like I have to put this on my list. And it's one of the big albums of this year, at least in terms of how I see it. And like so many albums, as you'll see in the honorable mentions, we're vying for this 5th spot. And this 5th spot has probably changed up for me like 7 times in the last bit. And it's like, okay, this one it has to be there. It has to be on my top 5. So yeah.
So my number 5 is also one that we've talked about. And that is To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar. I mean, this album is a real masterpiece, not only just as in the hip hop genre, but just in general. The complex like socio-political themes that are discussed in this album like go in depth as like a university essay would go, like really really well thought out, well written, and fully realized, as well as like the instrumentals are really cool, infusing elements of like funk and jazz and electronic music in really cool ways. It's got a lot of good bass lines because of Thundercat. And of course, Kendrick Lamar's, flow and rapping is just impeccable in like pretty much all these songs. The last track alone is like basically like a self-contained like film worth of content and lyricism. And then the other tracks like King Kunta or All Right or How Much a Dollar Cost or Complexion or The Blacker the Berry are all just like such good songs that really transcend a lot of other music from this year, in my opinion. And as a full album, of course, this album's like greater than the sum of its parts, as all good albums are. So this has to be on my list.
It is like a concept album too, right?
It is, yeah.
So
yeah, that's my number 5. Now your number 4.
My number 4 is Depression Cherry by Beach House. I've known this album for many years. I find it like to be a winter album, which maybe played into why I fell in love with it, because here in Canada it's always winter. So But yeah, I don't know. This album, so it's a dream pop album. If you don't know Beach House, they're like one of the big dream pop bands.
Yeah. Probably the biggest of the last 10 years.
Yeah,
at least.
totally. Yeah. And this album goes into, I don't actually know about its themes because I don't really listen to lyrics, and they're very peripheral, I feel like, a lot of these themes. But they seem to be telling about certain experiences. But generally the tone that the lyrics set up is one of kind of like lonely melancholy or like longing. And I feel like this album, I don't know, just like soaks you in that kind of atmosphere the entire time with somewhat simple kind of guitar lines, very, very wispy and ambient melodies. But yeah, not a huge amount of variety. And as far as Beach House goes, they don't generally have that much variety on their albums, I found.
No.
But the songs are like very powerful, and I find listening to it, coming back to it for this, listening to 2015 ones, I like was able to sing along with the entire album. So clearly it had some impact on me, even though I don't remember listening to this one like a hell of a lot. So either they're very catchy or have a great impression. But yeah.
Yeah, for me, I like Bloom a lot more, I'd say, and I like Teen Dream, and I like their newest one, Once Twice Melody, quite a bit too. So my number 4, Carrie and Lowell by Sufjan Stevens. You can probably tell that like a lot of these albums are very close to my heart. I've been listening to them for years. So, and Sufjan Stevens, Carrie and Lowell is one of those for me. Like I first heard it in 2015 when it came out, and it's just so beautiful. Like I don't know, the instrumentation on these songs is very simple. It's kind of indie folk, so a lot of it is just like acoustic guitar, vocals, piano, but also he includes a lot of like choral kind of passages as well that have like just these beautiful atmosphere and ambiance to it. And he uses like synthesizers, like kind of like warm synth pads and keyboards as well, and it just makes this like very haunting, chilling, and just utterly like heart-wrenching sound. Like a lot of these songs start as like kind of like more simple like finger-picked kind of like acoustic guitar songs with singing, like Sufjan's like beautiful fluttery voice, like whispery tone, right? Mm-hmm. And then suddenly the tracks will just like completely shift and change with these like just beautiful segments that come in out of nowhere, and you just soak in them, plus the lyrics are very personal, kind of all about his parents and childhood, and all these songs are so beautiful. But I can't talk about this album without mentioning the track 4th of July, which is just probably the most heavy song like emotionally that I've still ever heard. Like even 7 years later or whatever since this album came out, like every time I listen to this album I have to like mentally prepare for that song because it's just so sad. Like yeah, I don't know.
For that song, the equivalent is on his album Illinois, is The Seer, or The Sears Tower.
Sears Tower, yeah.
Very similar tone, like really minimal kind of dark piano chords and like really depressing singing. It's like, yeah, for sure.
But
I'll have more to say about this album after.
This lyric just has like that refrain of like, we're all gonna die.
Yeah.
And it just, I don't know, there's something about the way he sings it so like with such finality and this whimper to his voice. It's just so effective. And like, so not only that, like that's kind of like the emotional low point, I guess, on the album, but the other songs are still just so emotional in so many ways, either in very positive, uplifting ways or in very like dark and kind of like mournful ways. So what a beautiful album. Like this is an album that really never gets old, although I don't listen to it a lot just because of how heavy it is. Not like sonically, but just emotionally and lyrically, but really beautiful, and I think one of his best, honestly, although he has many really good albums.
So my number 3 is Ficción by Paula Navarrete. So she's an Ecuadorian indie pop artist who, I don't know, I've listened to a lot of Ecuadorian indie music. I don't know why Ecuador in particular. I guess I just listen to a lot of South American music, and Ecuador just has really good music, so I've just listened to a lot from there. But like, she's my favorite artist from that country. And for a good reason. So yeah, the first album that I listened to her from her was called Verde Fugaz, which was like a synth pop, like a really fun. I think it was from a few years later, like 2017 or something. But it's like a really fun, light, kind of cute synth pop album, essentially. And I was like, this is really cool. And then somewhat more recently, maybe half a year ago, I was like, I should listen to more from her. So I listened to this album, Ficción, and I was like, what the heck? This is like Baroque pop. This is like post rock. It's like a completely different genre with like almost I don't think it has any synth elements at all in it. So it's like just complete genre shift. Only a few years before. And so I was like, okay, I'm loving this sound. And so I continued to listen to it, and I found the melodies were stronger, more emotional, more memorable, like catchier. And then the instrumentation was more complex, often playing with really cool rhythms and all of that, and having like horns. Often in this album, you'll have horns, like really nice harmonics with horns in the background or strings, or singing like electric guitar lines, like you'd find in post rock. And it was like, I don't know, just so much variety on this album and so many different ideas explored in like the span of a little over 30 minutes. And it's like, I want more of this sound. This is awesome. So yeah, I have to include this. And I think it's probably one of the best albums I've, gotten into recently. So yeah.
Nice. So yeah, my number 3 is Art Angels by Grimes. So I know Grimes has kind of been like a more controversial figure recently, for dumb reasons, but like I think putting that aside, like her music is still really good. Not a huge fan of her latest few singles, but like otherwise I really liked her 2020 album, and I think this is her best album from 2015. So Art Angels is kind of like when she first really got into the mainstream, I guess. Like before that, she was just square like an indie artist who made music on like GarageBand, with her first 3 albums, and then like when she signed to 4AD. I think Visions was on 4AD, but it was like it made a splash, but it wasn't as big as this album. When this album came out, like this was one of the most talked about releases of 2015, which is cool because it's like an art pop album. So it's a very different genre than I think I usually listen to. But as far as pop music goes, I really, really enjoy this one. I think a lot of the songs have like just great production, really, really driving rhythms and bass, and I love her vocals and her vocal performances on all these songs. And I think that like somehow these songs are just really infectious and like really catchy to me, and I just really love the whole album. I do think that it kind of starts a little weak with the first 2 to 3 tracks, but like once you kind of get past that, every track from Flesh Without Blood to the end, in my opinion, is just beautiful. And I just listen to this album all the time still, like in my car. This is kind of a go-to album I throw in my car because it's just great to drive around to.
Twice I tried to get into this album and I could not get past California. And then I listened to it somewhat recently for this, and it was like, okay, this is fine once you get past those. And like, yeah, I don't know, not something I love.
Yeah, it just didn't grab you, and that's fine.
Yeah,
but
yeah, I do like Misanthropocene a lot. So like,
that's a really good album. I'd say that's like second in my opinion. I really like that one, but I think this is just a more consistent album. Some of my highlights are Flesh Without Blood. I think is her best song she's ever made. Maybe that or We Appreciate Power, but that's not on this album.
Right.
And then I really like Kill V Maim as well. The energy on that one is just insanely high. And then I like the title track a lot. Venus Fly with Janelle Monáe. And I really like the final track, Butterfly, as well. Oh, and of course, Reality, I have to mention. Although Reality's left off the vinyl version, which I think is sad. Anyway, yeah, great album. My number 3, and we'll move on.
My number 2 is Currents by Tame Impala. So this, as I was kind of hinting to earlier, is like indie-tronica / psychedelic pop. But yeah, I find this album impacted me a lot. So like a few years ago, I listened to this, and like before then, I didn't really listen to psychedelic music in general very much. Maybe a bit of like stoner rock, but like besides that, yeah, not much. And then this album kind of like kick-started my interest in psychedelic music, and since then I've probably listened to like well over 100 psychedelic. So like this definitely started my interest in that in that genre. And so yeah, this album is very catchy, but in a very heartfelt way. It doesn't feel studio. It doesn't feel, I guess what you call like. A lot of the fans said like he was selling out with this album.
It's not overproduced at all.
No, it's like it's perfect, and like that's something with Tame Impala. He changes his sound every time. Every album is like pretty different than the last. And jumping from Lonerism to this album, also after
kind
this
of
album, I came
shift.
back to listen to Lonerism after listening to this album, and it was like, ooh, very different sound. I think I like it better, but like this one, they're like so close, and they're both so good, and it's like But had to include this one on here. I would say favorite tracks. I could, for some reason, keep coming back for Disciples, even though it's like a 2-minute, essentially interlude.
One of the interludes, yeah.
But that one's one of my favorites. And then, of course, Let It Happen is just
amazing opening.
And of course, you got The Moment, and then Yes, I'm Changing. And both of those kind of have similar vibes, more low-key, really solid melodies that I can sing along to. You know, just an awesome album. If you haven't listened to Tame Impala somehow, if you're living in 2022 and you've never heard of Tame Impala somehow, then this album 100% is a great album to get into him with.
Solid pick for number 2. So my number 2 is Viet Cong by Preoccupations. So this is an album that I also like heard when it came out in 2015. I was on a ski trip, kind of a high school ski trip when we were going to the mountains, and I pulled this one on just with my headphones, and I was just like, what the heck, this album is like a masterpiece. And it was the first time I'd ever heard post-punk. And so like just the sound of how it's produced was so unique to me, and I just fell in love with it immediately. So like this album's produced in such a way that it's very lo-fi, and it's very distorted. It's produced in such a way that like the vocals are very low in the mix, and the guitars are very like crunchy sounding, and the drums are very like dry and kind of almost static. But at the same time, I think unlike a lot of post-punk that I've now heard, because I've gotten way more into the genre since then, it's not devoid of ambience like a lot of post-punk I think is. Yeah. This album has a lot of texture to it. It uses synths. It uses a lot of like wall of sound guitar kind of thing, like in some kind of sort of shoegaze way. But I think that what I like the most about this album is that across its like 7-track, 37-minute runtime, every track takes so many twists and turns that it almost goes into math rock territory, where you have like songs start a certain way and they just evolve and change so many times. And so every time I listen to it, it's like every track's a journey you just kind of go through, right? Like you don't necessarily start where you or end where you started. It's like the end is just a different evolution of what you've heard. And I think the tracks that do that the best are track 3, March of Progress, and track 7, Death, which is 11 minutes long. Both of those are just so cool in how they evolve and change, and the riffs they use, how heavy they get, really, really good. So I think this is one of the most like interesting listens of 2015, and it's just an album that stuck with me. It's probably not going to be many people's like top 5, but it's just one that like personally for me I've loved and have gone back to countless times since I first listened to it. So yeah, cool. And also the band's from Calgary, so they're close to us, which is cool.
That's nice. Canadian.
Yeah.
Recently I listened to, I forget what the album's name is, but
Public Strain
by Woman, which is this band, I guess a previous version of this band.
Yeah. No, they've gone through some lineup changes, but they've changed from Women to Viet Cong to Preoccupations. Okay, so now we're done with our 5 to 2.
Yeah.
And now we'll go into honorable mentions. So what are some of your honorable mentions that didn't quite make the cut?
So my first honorable mention is Fake the Bitters by 8-Bit Betty, and the E is capitalized in Betty. This is a chiptune album.
Oh, okay.
My favorite chiptune album of all time. Though there is another chiptune album by an artist called Cubby, Ember by Cubby, which is the same year. So I was like, I can only include one chiptune. Also a really good one. 2 of my favorite chiptune albums of all time are from this year, oddly enough. But yeah, so this album has, I don't know, strangely emotional robot voice. Like the singing is all like vocoder, and yet like it's extremely emotional, and like it's just, I don't know, really well put together album. The synth work, I guess, chiptune work, 8-bit work is like really, really well done. And it's like, oh, okay, I love this. My second honorable mention is Get to Heaven by Everything Everything.
Right.
This is an incredibly...
quite a story behind this one.
Yeah, so first time I listened to this, it was recommended by a friend, and I listened to the final track, just by chance, before I listened to this album, and I was like, whoa, this final track, Warm Healer, is amazing. Its bass line is so strong, it has elements like the ambient vocals that I find like Radiohead, and it just goes so many places, such a good track. And then I listened to the album, and I was so disappointed. I was like... This sucks. It's just all poppy melodies. The songs I just are grating a lot of the time, and I don't like the voice, and the lyrics I find like pretentious. Like they're the kind of lyrics where it's like, oh yes, I have very deep lyrics. Like I got that sense from it. It's like so I didn't like it. And then I was like just waiting for the closer, and then the closer is amazing. And it's like, how does this happen if they make one amazing track and then the rest? So recently I've re-listened to it, actually tried to give it a chance and get into it. And while I still do say that some of those aspects, like a little bit over poppy kind of melodies, the voice is not the best sometimes, and the lyrics are sometimes pretty cringe, this album did come around for me. And I actually came around to like really liking some of the melodies, not really hating any of the tracks, and overall like thinking it's an album worth listening to. And since I spent a long time on those first two, I'll just rush through the other ones. So, Quarters, ! By King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard is one of my favorite psychedelic rock albums. It captures like that old 60s production, like really lo-fi. And the album is split into quarters, 4 tracks that are all 10 minutes and 10 seconds. And this was the first one that I listened to by the band. And while I don't think it's the best by the band now, it did have a really big impact and made me want to listen to more from the band, so I had to include it on here. The fourth honorable mention is Tell Me I'm Pretty by Cage the Elephant. This album is like a garage rock. I don't know, I feel like its melodies are so strong and catchy. Lyrics are actually like pretty deep a lot of the time, if a little bit repetitive sometimes. And like, yeah, just a really fun album. One of those albums that I can just sing along to, don't really have to love, but I can just throw it on and enjoy it. So I listened to this one a lot. And then the fifth honorable mention is Mock Root by Tigran Hamasyan, which is a piano jazz album. I don't know what the specific genre is, but it's maybe avant-garde jazz. And I know that this artist is heavily influenced by metal. And so a lot of the piano that he plays on this album is like really complex timing, using time signatures and weird syncopation, and like really complex album. And like also the melodies that they do are like really fluty and like whimsical, really fun. So I had to recommend this. It's not a very well-known album, and it's like one of it's not an album I throw on a lot, but like there's a specific I guess mood that sometimes I need this kind of music, and then it's like, oh, it's perfect. What about yours?
Yeah, so I got 5 honorable mentions as well. I got 2 of them here on vinyl. I Love You, Honey Bear by Father John Misty. I don't know, this album's just a blast. It's indie folk, baroque pop, but it has like, the most important part of it I think is the vocals and lyrics. Like, it's a singer-songwriter album at core. And Father John Misty, or Josh Tillman, is just a really, really funny guy. He writes music that's so witty and so well thought out in terms of its lyricism. And they just have like scathing, sardonic social commentary. So a lot of this album is, about kind of having a very average American life with like with your wife or beloved, and just it sounds boring, but like the detail he goes into, and like the just the remarks he makes, the witty comments, the jokes are all land. They're so well and so funny. Like it's basically kind of like a bit of a doomer album in some ways in its lyrics. Like its commentary about America is not positive. That's for sure. How society has kind of forced people to have like reliance on basically another person or their job or antidepressants or other medication, and how capitalism has kind of screwed everyone over. It's like those kind of comments that you get, right? And it's sung in this way that's like so passionate and so beautiful and so like, forward, in a way that it's almost like kind of backhanded, where it's like he's kind of insincere in how he's singing, what I mean? Like, there's a couple songs though I think that are more heartfelt and genuine. I'd say those are True Affection and I Went to the Store One Day, the third track and the last track. Those songs sound straight from the heart. True Affection being about how people are becoming more isolated due to technology, and the last track about the time he met his wife. So it's like both of those are really, really beautiful. Yeah. And some other tracks that are like he's playing characters, or like, poking fun at religion and poking fun at like familial life. Really good stuff. And also instrumentally, it's beautiful and lush and great. Okay, so the next album from my honorable mentions that I have on vinyl is the 2015 Godspeed You Black Emperor album, Asunder Sweet and Other Distress. This is a brief album. It's only 40 minutes long, which is short for the band. Yeah. It's got 4 tracks. And really the first and fourth track are kind of the highlights. They're both pretty long, like 15-minute tracks that are these big crescendos and builds with these heavy riffs and just like grand kind of, sound palette to them. And then the middle 2 tracks are sort of like a bridging drone piece that are shorter. It's not one of their best records by any means, but after seeing them live a few weeks ago here in our home city, I really became to appreciate their later music, because I think I slept on a lot of these albums when they first came out, because I always have preferred, and I still do prefer, their kind of first few albums and that kind of sound. But after seeing them live, I really started to appreciate the sound that they're kind of trying to do on this album. I kind of clicked for me when I saw them live. And so I've been listening to their new music a lot.
As far as post-rock goes, Godspeed You Black Emperor is one of the best. So.
They are. Also one of the kind of OG.
Yeah, totally.
And then so my others I don't have on vinyl, but I'll briefly list them off. So one of them is a vaporwave ambient album from 2015, probably the best, in my opinion, the best vaporwave project that's ever come out, and that's 2814 by Dream Catalog. Right. Album's just so beautiful and dreamy, and just it puts you in this like rainy cyberpunk universe, like out of Blade Runner or something like that, mm-hmm. just so perfectly. And a lot of the tracks are just great to kind of vibe to and just soak in. So really, really good album, and I totally recommend it to anyone that wants a kind of like neon, sort of like dreamy ambient experience that it does definitely fits in the kind of vaporwave sound, but in such a more professional and like polished aesthetic, I guess, mm-hmm. than a lot of vaporwave had, which was very cheap sounding. And then another one that I'd mention is New Bermuda by Deaf Heaven. So this album is kind of the follow-up to Sunbather, which is definitely their biggest album. And it's kind of just more of the same. It's just more like Sunbather. So if you like Sunbather by Deaf Heaven, which is an album I definitely recommend, but from 2013, not 15, you'll like New Bermuda, because it's kind of like that, just like a continuation of that sound. And then another one, the final honorable mention that I'll talk about is Death Grips the Power That Be. You know, just kind of recently got into that album based on our listen to it, but I have to shout out here because it's just, as we discussed in our videos, a really cool, groundbreaking, and mind-bending experience. Okay, so without further ado, now that we talked about our honorable mentions, what are our number ones? Starting with you.
Yeah, so my number one, it was already mentioned, is Carrie and Lowell by Sufjan Stevens. It's been one of my favorite albums of all time for a very long time. It goes into depth about like so many very deep topics like religion and like questioning one's faith, mm-hmm. Which is something I did experience though I came out the other end. I can really, I guess, relate to that, and that also with him suffering with that's not him, that's his dad or something, but
yeah, those are his parents.
Yeah. But with like his struggle with depression and all of that, I can really relate to that, and a lot of the metaphors and a lot of the imagery that he paints about his experience with depression is like, it just really touches me. And then also tying that into the, I guess, religious themes, and like how like one can search for like something more out there because it's just like you're so helpless. That's like really emotional for me, that kind of thing. And then of course the lyrics and the kind of concept that is throughout the album about his parents. I don't know if it's just his mom or his parents, but like abandoning him when he was young or something. Mm-hmm. And it's like that kind of neglect is just so powerful. I feel like all the lyrics on this album are just so powerful and very like creative. A lot of them use allusions to the Bible or certain experiences in his life, or just paint really nice images, or just sometimes just clearly say something like right out. And I feel like it's all so tastefully done. And then of course the guitar work is just beautiful. The production of it all is amazing. And I think really in terms of like singer-songwriter / folk, I think that this is one of the best albums like ever to be released in those genres. And I've listened to a lot, so that's like a high opinion for me. So yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So my number one has also been talked about, and that is Currents by Tame Impala.
I was wondering, I was like, wow, you're not going to include this album on here?
Oh, I am. This is my favorite album of 2015, and one of my favorites of the decade of the 2010s too. Like, man, this album's so good. Like, every track is just a banger in the true sense of the word, you know? Like, when I listen to this album, it's just like from start to finish, it's like, oh, this song, oh, this song, oh, this song, oh, and I'm always just looking forward to the next one, because it's like every track is awesome. And it starts so strong with Let It Happen, of course. A 7-minute, like, just psychedelic masterpiece. Like, just goes through so many different, you know, corridors and avenues with its sound. And it's so glitchy, but also so catchy and so lush and so cool and funky. It's so good. Also, I have to mention the drumming and the bass lines on almost every one of these songs are, like, impeccably good. Like, so good and so memorable. But yeah, like, you got a couple good interludes on this album, but the real, like, key tracks are, like, you know, Let It Happen, The Moment, Yes, I'm Changing, Eventually, The Less I Know, The Better, which I'm surprised you didn't mention. That song's like the best one on the album, though, I think.
That's like that's like a really popular one, or like a fan favorite or something, but like, I don't know, not my favorite track by far.
Really? Every time I listen to that track, like, I mean, I listen to the album pretty much always as a whole album, but whenever I get to this song, it's just instant chills whenever, like, the full instrumentation comes in a few seconds in. And then by the end of the song, I'm always just, like, completely vibing out to it, because it's just so, I don't know, it just really takes me on just a journey, you know? Such a cool song. And then other tracks, like, you know, Cause I'm the Man, I really love, Past Life, Reality in Motion, and then the final track, New Person, Same Old Mistakes.
Can you just name all the songs?
Mostly. The last track is just so good. I love its bass line, and it's so like, I don't know, so groovy. Right?
It's so intense. Like it's actually like a really dark song.
Yeah.
Yeah. This album.
Again, amazing album. And definitely check it out if you have not. Yeah, so that's our list from 2015. One of my favorite years in music, honestly.
Yeah, we've been putting off this video for a while because we're like, oh, we should do a first listen of this album for this year. Oh, we should do a first listen of this album. We've just been wanting to listen to all this because there's just so much good music in this year. So yeah.
Unfortunately, Drones didn't make it on either of our lists.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more reaction videos and also more year videos.
Sorry, what did they say? Ring the bell.
Yes.
Or like click. Don't ring it, because click the bell.
Click the bell. What
Yeah.
bell do we mean? Well, you'll see it on your screen.
The rhyme, I love it. Yeah, bye. Yeah,
Bye.
You can leave now.